This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum. With me, as always, Marcus Merrell, my partner in crime. Marcus, same location, 3 weeks in a row. It is a record, Marcus.
I think you're going to get another one next week because I'll be in London between now and then, but I'm coming home by the next time.
We just keep getting you at home, which is kind of nice. No calling from your car, no calling from the road.
No complaints.
No complaints. Yeah, there you go. Although I kind of want you to go to your local. Can you go to SFO and can you just stand there with your phone and do an episode sometime, just so we can make it feel more like you're on the road more?
I'll do that.
Okay, sounds good. And joining us today, we're very lucky to have Allen Loew, Principal Quality Engineer at Progressive Leasing. Allen, thank you so much for coming on Test Case Scenario.
Hey, you're welcome. Glad to be with you guys. Yeah, long time Sauce Labs advocate, so happy to
show
be with
off
you.
that shirt.
That's right.
I mean, that's how you know, right? You see one of those shirts, always know that they go back and they love Sauce Lab. It's actually one of my favorite shirts too. And I'm kind of jealous that you're wearing it and not me. All good. Cool. So Allen, today we were talking before we hit record, and there are so much shocker. We have a conversation before we hit record, giving that away for those folks at home who might not know. And there are so many topics that we could get into today with you, Allen. But the one that we settled on, and I think is a very good topic, is this conversation on the evolution of the roles of the developer QA role, and why anyone that's manual testing, in your words, I'm going to use, this is Allen's words here, anyone manual testing better start using their free time to learn automation instead of Netflix and beer afterward, which is a fantastic quote, by the way.
Indeed, yes. When I began, it was all manual testing. So there were a few tools, but they were nothing really to speak of, and certainly nothing that Sauce Labs could be compared to. And yeah, we had very distinct expectations of being manual testers that were handed stuff. It was the throw it over the wall model, and developers were not just in another room, but also in another class socially. Marcus, you may remember this.
Yes.
It was tossed over to the wall to us, and they said, come back to us with a result. And those were the early days. Fortunately, in my view, all those days are gone. And now we're in quite a different space. A lot to talk about if we want in the evolution of how we got from there to present day. But
I think that'd be kind of cool to talk about.
Yeah.
Marcus, I would love to hear from your words too.
I mean, it was the era of, it works on my machine. Back when developers, they wouldn't believe you, essentially, if you brought a bug to them or something like that, because from everything they've got, it actually works just fine. My transition was a little bit weird in that I was brought in from, my very first QA job was an automation job, just because I was very adept with Perl, and the company needed a tester who understood Perl. So I wrote Perl scripts to simulate HTTP traffic on day one of my first testing role. So we never had manual testers. This is 99-ish. And it was just a very unusual circumstance. And that job is actually what led me to really have a deep appreciation for API testing, and then eventually begrudgingly moving into the world of UI and functional testing, because I always thought that API testing was a lot more reliable, a lot more stable, a lot faster. But the truth is that people just wanted UI testing. So I had to learn that along the way. But for sure, it used to be, I used to work with folks, developers who just, whenever they saw me coming down the hall, they would groan. I had a job in 2001, a monitoring company that doesn't exist anymore. I remember at one point I had one developer push back on me so frequently, so consistently, that I actually pulled some stats from our version of Jira, which I think was called Bugzilla at the time. And I basically said, okay, in the 18 months I've worked here, I have written up over 450 bugs, and exactly 3 of them have been considered invalid. So I respect the fact that you don't think that this is actually a defect, but you need to know statistically you have a less than 0.5% chance of being right. Didn't work as an argument, but it sure made me feel good. And we went on to have a productive discussion because I brought data. It was a different era. In some ways, I miss it just because the technology itself was so simple. You could simulate a test in 3 HTTP commands and not really worry about cookies. But it's good now in that we get to be on the cutting edge of all this really crazy stuff around mobile and complex microservices and crazy cloud computing infrastructure. And the evolution's been really interesting.
Indeed.
Yeah. Allen, so you go through that evolution and we're fast forwarding a bit. When did you first start seeing the change? Was it the DevOps movement? Was it, basically around, I guess, like 2014-ish time frame? Or, was it Selenium and then an evolution? Take us, I guess, through some of those like big.
Yeah, I would say it was imagine the earliest days of Sauce Labs, right? So I was at the first Sauce Labs conference. And I still remember that year, and it was a very small affair compared to recent years. But I think around then, yes, that transition really began because we had testers writing stuff in Selenium and then also using Sauce Labs. And to me, it felt like it was something that I could share with the developers and they could relate to, and they were interested in seeing, right? If I just approached them with paper or an impression, a personal story about something or whatever, it just seemed less of a catch to them, right? But if I could show them, hey, look, here is some code that I have written around this particular Jira ticket or whatever ticketing system you're using, and here are the expected results in the actual, that spoke more easily to the developers, and they began to get more interested in that. And they began, in some cases, to pair develop some tests with us. So that was a big part of the evolution. Yes. Real tools and then real open source tools. So here was a barrier to it. When we had, in the old school days, we had much more expensive and proprietary tools that would cost thousands of dollars per seat and per quality engineer. And often in their own language, not the same language that the application was developed in. And this erected an artificial barrier between the developers and the quality engineers.
The crazy thing was that back when I'll name names, the Quick Test Professional made by Mercury and then bought by HP at some point. It was a fairly easy to use tool, kind of a low code before low code was even a term we used. And it allowed you to record scripts and stuff like that. But the crazy thing to me, the thing that never made sense to me as a business model was that it would cost the same number of seat licenses to execute a test as it would to develop tests. So if I'm sitting there and I'm developing tests, that's fine. I have, 50 tests that I've developed. And then if I want to run those tests, I have to give up my seat license for the moment and run those tests basically on the same machine. And it will consume that seat license the entire time. And it's the same thing, like $4,000 for a single license, which means that there's no way to scale it. We had 4 licenses and we couldn't run the test during the day because 4 of us were using the software. And then at night, we would have an automated process that would kick them off and run them in 4 at a time in parallel threads. And I'm telling you, the day WebDriver was announced in 2008 after what's called the steel cage knife fight, you can Google that. That's a YouTube video with Simon Stewart and Jason Huggins. The day after that video came out and they announced that they were basically supporting WebDriver as an open source project, we abandoned 2 years of Quick Test Professional work. And basically we're back up to parity within 6 weeks, but we were able to execute those tests 80, 90 at a time and get our test results back in minutes, not hours. So the newness of the open source concept at that point really worked in our favor and has since evolved into a whole different beast, for better or worse.
Indeed. And if you went back in time, if you could search the archive of job posts, there was a short season there where you could really do well for yourself as an independent consultant on gigs taking Quick Test Pro scripts and converting them over to Selenium and WebDriver. That was a thing back in the day.
Is there any equivalent to that? I'm just trying to, as you were speaking, I'm like, what is the equivalent of that like today? Can that happen again? Because it feels like we're so entwined with the WebDriver ecosystem.
I recently got a marketing email from someone who shall remain nameless and did not do any research on me or my company before they sent the email, but they basically said, we can engage a consulting group to convert all of your Selenium tests to Playwright in 2 weeks, guaranteed.
Wow.
And I think that it's still open source to open source. The perception is that they're trying to portray the narrative that Selenium is dying and that Playwright's the next upcoming thing. And the trajectories are kind of undeniable, but like we're still a long way from that. And I'm still not sure Playwright and Selenium aren't going to sort of merge, at least in concept at some point. So it was just a weird thing to get. And that's what I'm seeing right now is people were abandoning Quick Test to go to Selenium. And now they're trying to at least project the narrative that people are abandoning Selenium to go to Playwright.
The news of the day, and this is obviously pre-recorded, is that Playwright is going to adopt WebDriver by die. So it's supporting the WebDriver ecosystem. So all things, yeah.
Yeah, I think our industry is filled with the predictions of tools that would die by a certain date, and it has come nowhere close to being true. For instance, Linux, the announcement of the death of Selenium is very much premature and very questionable. I would not put a lot of money on that myself. I would compare it maybe to Java. That even let's say there is another language that completely overtakes Java, even so. And there are good reasons for a test engineer to consider other languages, but Java it's going to be here for a long, long time. Even if there was a concerted effort, an organized effort to be rid of it, it just will not happen quickly.
Yeah, I think we gave the numbers when Jason Huggins was on the show, and we talked about sort of why the hell isn't Selenium considered a success story is beyond, I think, us, because it's been around for 20 years. It's got, what was it? I think we threw out the number when Jason was here, 100 million users, Java alone. And it's not to pit one against the other, because that's a really poor way to, that's not really apples to apples. We should never put open source to open source. I don't believe in that personally. But the trajectory that you were referring to, Marcus, was Playwright is on I think it was a 14 million users in a month upswing on JavaScript, somewhere like that. And in that same month, Selenium had the 100 million users in Java alone. So, it's got a long ways to go before it's got complete market dominance.
And I think it's also penetrated a different persona. I mean, I think that
absolutely
the JavaScript Playwright developer is a different kind of persona than the Java Selenium developer. And I'm not sure you could say that the Selenium Java developer is going to go away anytime soon. That seemed like a pretty bold prediction. People have been saying that for 10 years, that it would happen in 2 years, and it hasn't. So it's barely even budged.
Going back to the premise, of what we were originally talking about, I have a friend who's an automation. He's not an automation engineer. He's a live tester. And his company said, you're going to start learning Selenium and you're going to become an automation engineer. And it's taken him a while. The learning curve is steep. And when we revisited it months later, I asked him, how's the Selenium training going? Did you take some of our, did you watch some of the stuff we produced? Can I put you in touch with anybody? And he's like, we gave up on it. It was, our team is not doing it, where it's going to go to someone else. It's going to go, the developers are going to be working on it. It's going to someone else. And it kind of goes back to kind of what you were talking about. I feel like originally here, Alan, is anyone who's currently only manual testing is getting left behind.
Oh yeah. That door is definitely closing, most of the way closed now. There's no way around that. I think there'll always be a space for an all manual tester in specialty applications, and in particular, very creative applications, right? Things that are just extremely difficult to narrow down to some binary result in code. But yeah, for the most part, you really have to be automating. I mean, how can you keep up? That would be my open question to anyone disagreeing with us on this point. How can you keep up as a manual only tester with the velocity and the trajectory of your team? There's just no other way. I couldn't do my job without some automation.
You have to lay down that baseline and understand where the variations are. And that's where you use your human brain for analysis, but you cannot scale the way automation can scale. And I know that like the room that's left for a manual tester in this world right now is around either being niche or being highly technical, even though you may not be into automation. Niche, I mean, accessibility is a good area for testing. There are definitely a lot of full-time accessibility testers who are manual only. And then the other one that I can think of offhand besides security, which is another obvious one. If y'all know Marhat Puhai-Arvi, she's on the Selenium board of directors, and she's been on the podcast before. She is very, very, very highly technical and can write automation and does write unit tests and all sorts of testing. But she is a tireless advocate of exploratory, high energy, focused manual testing, because that's how you save the user from a bad experience. And I think that, to me, if you're going to stay a manual tester, you have to at least bring a lot with you in terms of skills to be able to run a SQL query to make sure that the data you're seeing is correct. Then power up some API tests to make sure that you're validating what you're seeing on the front end. But you have to supplement your exploratory manual testing with deep technical skills to be able to give the developers truly root cause. You want to serve up the root cause to them on a plate and say, here's the code that actually broke that caused this defect. As opposed to just saying, here's what I did to reproduce it. Goodbye. Go.
That's right. Developers definitely appreciate that. If you can even say this file, this line, this method, that's where the error was. So Marcus, what you brought up there is something that I see it all the time today, when a really good tester will find bugs. Let's say someone like me are primarily interested in automation, primarily writing automation. I find a lot of really cool stuff when I'm doing my exploratory testing that I have time to do specifically because I've got a suite of automated tests that are running in the background, right? So there I'm scaling just by myself, right? I've got a suite of tests that are running away, and then that gives me time to do the really interesting, creative stuff on the front end. And you find bugs that way.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And the bugs you find are really important. Good chance, right? Really important bugs that'll save the user from having a bad experience on your site.
I've heard that there's a split. Is there a number that we're trying to aim for of live to automation when you're creating your test strategy?
Oh, you mean manual to automated test?
Manual to automation, yeah.
Yeah. The correct number is, it's a variable, right? So, on one project, I might be at 70-30, and that might be the sweet spot. But on another, it might be 95-5. Our primary role is, to find that sweet spot and be pursuing it. But I don't think there can be a mandate handed down saying you have to have this percentage. I just don't think, especially at the beginning of a project, I don't think anyone on the team knows where that sweet spot is. And we have to find that. It's just discovery.
How do you find it?
By looking at your test case, having a growing understanding of the test cases, and by seeing what you can automate. And then the first sort is you're throwing out the stuff that's really obvious. So let's just say the sample size is 10, or the better number is 100. Let's say it's 100 test cases. And there will be, let's say, 5 of them that will be obviously bad candidates for automation. And there will be, let's say, 80 that will be really good candidates for automation, crying out, automate me. Some in the middle that you're not quite sure yet. You might have to run the test through a couple times and think, is this worth doing? Is this possible? Marcus, what do you think about that? That's a big part of my upfront work when I start on a new team or a new project, is finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends so much on the industry and the vertical that you're in and what user you are serving. And we have a Slack channel in the company called Broken Stuff. And we post stuff all the time, like buggy stuff we encounter in the real world. Like my favorite is seeing, blue screens from airports. That's, like post CrowdStrike. That's always a fun one. Someone posted this morning that he's got a bridge toll that he has to pay from the Bay Area and he can't pay it. He goes on the website, can't pay it. No matter what he does, goes from Safari, goes from Chrome, goes from an incognito session. No matter what happens, something is broken with his account that he cannot pay. There's no phone number, no chat support, nothing. And yet there is no other vendor at all that can serve to fix this problem. So he's got to wait for a letter to come in the mail threatening collection action that comes with a self-addressed stamped envelope that he has to put a check into and return it. And there's so much to unpack there. But what I keep thinking is, how much you do manual testing versus automation testing is going to be so dependent on the loyalty you force your users to have versus, are you jealously guarding your customers because they can easily jump to another platform? Or do you not have to care because they're captive? The insurance company we work for, they don't have to make it a pleasurable user experience for me. I'm married to them. There's nothing I can do about it.
That being said, they have a wonderful experience in my opinion.
Ours happens to be good.
I've had some really poor ones, and I was actually amazed at how easy theirs was to use. But that's a really good point.
And my favorite travel site in the world has gone downhill greatly since it went from being like a generally available consumer product to a product that is kind of tied to the business. And that way, when they have an enterprise contract, they don't care about my experience. They care about the admin's experience, because that's the person who's going to make the decisions on it. So to me, the variability is very wide between the kinds of things you're going to test for and whether it's going to be manual or automated. I think that the split is probably roughly, for most people, going to fall in the 20 to 25% manual and try to automate the rest of it. API, far higher. I think API should be more like 90%.
Yes.
That might be, generally understood, but you're never going to get away from having to do 15 to 20% manual. 25% is probably a more realistic target. That's just a swag.
And like you said, some verticals to kind of dictate, like gaming is incredibly manual testing, dependent.
Marcus, I have a question for you. Have you encountered this edict from on high where you have to automate a certain percentage or whatever? Have you encountered that before?
Yes. Yes. I was at RetailMeNot for 7 years, and I take no credit for this. I think I've said this on the podcast before. I take no credit for this, but we never had a single outage on Black Friday or Cyber Monday while we were there. I was not really even involved with this. It's just that what I'm saying is that there was a very high degree of quality at the company. We all took pride in our work. We made a great seamless experience. We understood how to test the really complicated stuff underneath, like user analytics, business intelligence, all that stuff. I wasn't involved with the performance testing team, but they were just top notch. They could teach anyone how to make a durable, robust site. And yet, toward the end of my tenure there, we got a new CTO. He came from AWS. And he immediately, the first thing he told me was, you're going to give me a report that says that you have 100% test coverage in your code coverage in your test automation. And I was like, why? Why do you need that? What does that tell you? Does that tell you that we have quality? Because if you think that that's what it does, then I'm sorry, but you're incorrect. Basically, what I said was, in the end, I said, I will give you 100% code coverage if you let me define what that means, how that 100% is calculated. Because I think that there is a certain amount of code that is not appropriate to cover, and there's a certain amount of the edge case code that is difficult to cover, that is also not important to cover, and we'll be missing out on really important stuff if we spend all that time covering it. So, and we did not get off on the right foot, and I was gone within 3 months, voluntarily. So yes, has that happened to you, Alan?
Indeed, yeah. It's a conversation. It's a sometimes stressful conversation we have to have with our leadership sometimes as quality professionals.
Yeah, I didn't win the argument, unfortunately.
Yes, that happens. I've felt this for years. I'm just not going to be dissuaded from this opinion that the best quality is achieved through some judicious mix of manual and automated. And at the beginning of a project, I just can't tell you what that mix is going to be. I just know I'm going to hit it or come very close over time and get better.
Yeah, you're a professional. That's your job. That's what we do. Yeah,
exactly.
The closer we get, you mentioned Black Friday, and the closer we get to the holidays and everything, I'm sure a lot of companies are gearing up for that right now. And I'm thinking about that split and about that vertical specifically, and manual versus automation. And what are some things that you would look for? The shopping cart error was one that got me all Black Friday last year. Like I had at least 3 to 4 experiences that were negative last Black Friday. I don't know what was in the water. It was one of the worst. I don't know if it was load. I don't know if it was the shopping cart just simply had a bug, but I was getting them multiple times. Could it be my own browser? Honestly, I don't know, since it kept happening. But I checked in other browsers. I was trying to buy pet food and I was going in an endless loop because I got new kittens for my daughter for post Thanksgiving. I had to go to the store. I couldn't even buy it online. So the one store that I was trying to buy online lost business to the store that's local to me. So I would imagine this is happening not just to me. And I'm wondering when you're trying to test and you're coming up with that algorithm of what is the right amount of manual versus automation, what do you look for specifically in like instances like this for a retail situation? Black Friday.
So yeah, that changes the question entirely in terms of what is the sweet spot, right? Because that's out the window, performance testing and load testing in particular. And there's a difference between the two. But yeah, the load testing, the preparation for Black Friday is a whole separate animal altogether. And that requires careful planning, and it also requires humility. By that, I mean, you could plan beautifully and still get some wrong results on that day. It is an event for which no retailer, regardless of size and resources, can be fully prepared.
I think that was a little bit at the secret of why we were so successful with it, is that we always understood sort of the boundaries and the ideas. And we built a lot of recoverability, failover. We covered our bases, but we were also all hands on deck. I mean, we never had Black Friday off. There were people in the office 24 hours not only dealing with software, but also dealing with content. One year, it wasn't there. This is a story I heard from a different retail site. On Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a cert expired on a load balancer. And they were like, how could this happen the Wednesday before Thanksgiving? Like, so now that's part of the checklist. Check your certs. Make sure they don't expire. All those even non-functional testing, that has to happen. And to me, the whole cart checkout thing, it's like you literally have one job. Like that is the only thing that needs to work on Black Friday. Everything else can fail. The other thing that we had at Retail Me Not, which I thought was fascinating, was since we didn't actually sell anything, we didn't have cart checkout. Our whole thing was about attribution and dropping cookies. We had the ability with a single button to push to deploy a static website that would deploy with sort of yesterday's versions of the most successful offers we had. And it was just static HTML on a page. And it would still do all the right attribution and all the right cookies and everything. It wasn't dynamically constantly resorting the coupons, but it was still generating revenue and still forwarding requests on, which I think is a very, very good fail-safe to have.
Man, that sounds like an excellent failback.
I wish I could take credit for the idea. It was a brilliant idea. Brilliant set of engineers that worked there at that point. It was really great.
I have a Black Friday story to tell you. So I worked at Overstock.com. They were a good employer back in the day, and they took Black Friday very seriously, and through to Cyber Monday as well. And it was the same thing, Marcus, where all hands were on deck and nobody had that day off and everybody was required to be in the office. And there was code freeze, obviously. No one was pushing new code that was not an absolute emergency, but everyone nevertheless had to be in the office. And for us, it was a festive time and it was rather joyful because we had worked so hard up to that point. And then we had a couple days in the office where not much was expected of us except to be there. And people would bring in food and music. And so it was sort of fun. It was sort of a celebration, but we were also ready to return to duty. I kind of compared us to firefighters around Independence Day in America.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Ready to roll out.
You're ready to roll, but yeah.
It's like being in the crisis. What is it? The crisis room, the
war room. I don't know.
The war room. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Are we still able to call it that? I don't really know. Anyway, as we're talking through this, I was like, sometimes we like to play fun games here on the test case scenario. We're not even games, but we like to do a top 5 or top 3 or whatever. This got me thinking this could be a good time to do a top 5. So I would love to hear your top 5 how to prepare for Black Friday as a software tester tips. From being in it, having lived it, what would you put as your top 5? And maybe we could go back and forth. Is that cool with you, Allen?
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Marcus? Game?
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
All right, cool. Alan, you want to go
Already
first?
started sort of giving a
number
few.
one?
Sure. Yeah. That you have test cases in mind for exactly this scenario that you've not just written, but that you've had the team review and the team agrees on them. So they're ready to go. And the whole team knows if we have to execute this, we agree this is what we're doing.
Awesome. Number two, Marcus.
I actually am a huge fan of literal practice of drills. So build a very similar environment to production, have everyone who has a finger on access to that environment, either sitting around a table or sitting around a Zoom, and you orchestrate an outage that you all have to recover from. And you do that 2 or 3 times. And we did it. And it was kind of transformative because everyone kind of thought it was a silly idea until you got into it and realized, I actually don't know what to do at this point. And so it really is, it is shockingly instructive. It is a little expensive, but compared to what you would lose if you dropped on Black Friday, oh my goodness.
I imagine a football team practices before the Super Bowl, so it only makes sense.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Alan?
Yeah. So the next thing I would have would be a good set of test data or multiple data sets ready to
Absolutely.
go. Right. Yeah, that's very important. Customer data, payment information, authentication.
All right, Marcus. I think we're 4.
You're probably testing against some external services, so external APIs like PayPal and Shopify and different services that your company's paying for and dependent on, and that also might have an outage. You need to have a plan for how to recover from something like that, either an alternative or something that is going to be able to store up or somehow get you to, because we actually had a problem where another vendor, a company that was one of our top 5 vendors that we would refer sales to, they had a problem on Black Friday and it cost us $200,000. So check in with your partners, check in with your dependencies, and make sure you at least have some sort of a mitigation plan for if this goes down, it's a disaster. You don't show your user a 404 or a blank screen. You refer them to something else, or you have an alternative for them. In fact, we used to put coupons on the 404 page, which I think is a nice hack.
Right. Yeah.
Alan, you want to take the last one?
Sure. Yeah. So payment processors. So just plan that at least one payment processor might have a hiccup. And what are you going to do about that? Are you ready with something?
Yeah. Contract testing.
Yeah.
Absolutely vital in these cases when you're depending on someone else's API.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And here's one last one. It's probably obvious. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry, but time. Plan as early as possible, like 3 to 6 months. Honestly, 3 months is probably too soon. Like 6 months in advance. When they're putting everything into inventory, that's probably when you should start planning, which is about what is that? July usually for the holiday season. So that's what I would recommend.
Indeed. No, that's good advice. Yeah.
Like now's the time. Yeah.
Now.
Right.
Now. If you
Like
haven't
now.
done it yet, now.
You haven't done it yet.
Now.
It is not too late, but
I'm sorry.
is getting there.
Yeah, exactly. Now, unfortunately, your 6-month plan is now consolidated because regardless, your plan still has to be all of those steps, right? You can't miss anything. That's when you start having the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciate you coming on Test Case Scenario. I warned you we were going to go into a lot of topics.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Go wherever conversation went.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for playing along and participating. And you were an awesome guest. Really appreciate it. Hope you come back again.
Thank you. Will do.
Awesome. And thank you. And thanks, Marcus. I never thank Marcus. Marcus, thank you, Marcus.
It's fine. I'm glad to be here.
It's fine. This is why I don't thank Marcus. Thank you for listening, giving us the most valuable, precious thing that you could give, which is your time to listen to these episodes. And we hope you join us again on Test Case Scenario. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.